It was late one evening when Mr. Reynolds, the school janitor at Ridgewood Middle School, was finishing up his usual tasks. The halls were quiet, the floors freshly mopped, and the cafeteria lights dimmed. He didn't expect to see anyone at that hour, especially not a child. But there, standing near the supply closet, was a small, trembling boy, Charlie. Charlie wasn't like the other kids. He was only 12, but something about him made him seem even younger. His shoulders were narrow, his arms thin, and his eyes held a kind of sadness that seemed far too old for his years. Most kids bounced through the school with energy, but Charlie moved like a shadow, always cautious, as if trying not to be noticed. Teachers had begun to whisper concerns among themselves, not because he was disruptive, but because he was too quiet, too anxious. Mr. Reynolds almost brushed it off when Charlie asked, in a barely audible voice, if he could stay at the school overnight. At first, the janitor thought it was just a child trying to avoid bedtime, maybe a prank, or a kid who didn't want to do homework. But when he looked into Charlie's eyes, he saw something that stopped him cold: fear. Not the kind of fear you get from failing a test or missing the school bus. This was deeper, a bone-deep dread that made Mr. Reynolds pause with his mop still in hand. "Everything okay, son?" he asked gently, stepping closer. Charlie flinched, as if the question itself was a threat. He glanced nervously down the empty hallway, then back at Mr. Reynolds. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Please, can I stay here tonight? I'll be quiet. I'll find a corner. I don't want to go home." Mr. Reynolds felt a chill run down his spine. He'd worked at the school for years, had seen his share of difficult students and troubled homes. But this was different. There was no anger in Charlie's voice, no teenage rebellion, just raw desperation. He tried to coax more information out of the boy, but Charlie wouldn't or couldn't say more. Instead, he mumbled an apology, grabbed his old backpack, and disappeared down the hallway before the janitor could stop him. That brief encounter left a knot in Mr. Reynolds' stomach. He couldn't sleep that night. The image of Charlie's fearful eyes haunted him. Something was terribly wrong, and he knew it. The next morning, he went straight to Charlie's homeroom teacher, Mr. Evans. Mr. Evans had already been concerned. He'd noticed bruises on Charlie's wrist a few weeks earlier, faint, like shadows on pale skin, but shaped in a way that didn't look accidental. When he'd asked Charlie about them, the boy had simply pulled his sweatshirt sleeves down and muttered, "I'm fine." It was the same answer every time. Miss Turner, another teacher who supervised detention, had seen Charlie drop to the floor in panic when someone slammed a locker too loudly. The boy's reactions were always sharp, as if he lived on edge. It all pointed to something no one wanted to say out loud. This child might be in danger. That night in the hallway was no longer just a strange moment. It was a cry for help, one that could no longer be ignored. Mr. Evans, Miss Turner, and Mr. Reynolds began watching more closely, their concern growing heavier each day. For them, Charlie wasn't just another student. They saw a boy fighting silent battles, hiding bruises on his body and in his heart. And though he wouldn't say it, his eyes had already spoken. He was afraid to go home. After Mr. Reynolds shared his unsettling encounter with Charlie, Mr. Evans, the boy's homeroom teacher, found himself unable to think about anything else. He had been teaching for nearly 2 decades and had seen children from every walk of life, some loud and defiant, others quiet and broken. But there was something about Charlie that had always unsettled him. The boy didn't just avoid eye contact, he avoided presence altogether, moving through school like a ghost, hoping no one would notice. Mr. Evans had first spotted the bruises during a reading assignment. Charlie had reached across his desk, and his sweatshirt sleeve slipped just enough to reveal dark marks on his wrist. They looked like fingerprints, something no tumble on the playground would cause. When Mr. Evans asked gently, "Is everything okay at home?" Charlie gave the same answer he always did, a small shrug, and the words, "I'm fine," spoken so quietly, they almost dissolved into the air. But it wasn't fine. Mr. Evans knew that. The boy's pale face, hunched posture, and reluctance to speak told a different story. He wasn't alone in noticing. Miss Turner, who often supervised detention or stayed late grading papers, had witnessed something that stuck with her. One afternoon, a student accidentally slammed a locker door shut behind Charlie. In an instant, Charlie had dropped to the floor and covered his head with his arms. It had happened so fast, like a reflex. He looked terrified, not surprised, but expecting impact. That kind of reaction doesn't come from cartoons or roughhousing. It comes from experience. When Miss Turner brought it up to Mr. Evans in the teacher's lounge the following day, her voice was filled with worry. "That boy's carrying something heavy," she said quietly, stirring her coffee. "And I don't think it's just school stress." Mr. Evans agreed, and the two began sharing more observations. Charlie rarely ate more than a few bites of lunch. He often wore the same threadbare hoodie, even when the weather was warm. His notebooks were full of scribbles and anxious doodles rather than actual notes, and his hands always trembled when he was asked to speak in front of the class. The more they compared notes, the clearer the picture became. Charlie was likely suffering in silence, hiding the kind of pain that no child should ever have to carry. But they also knew how difficult it could be to help a child who won't or can't speak. That's when they called in Miss Dawson. Miss Dawson was a social worker who had worked with Ridgewood Middle School for years. She wasn't flashy or cold like some might expect from government workers. She was warm, calm, and methodical. Known for her patience and deep empathy, she was often the first adult a troubled child would trust. When she came to the school, she didn't burst into the classroom or make a scene. She waited quietly until Charlie had a free period, then asked to speak with him in a small counseling office near the front office. The room was modest, just a table, 2 chairs, and a high window that let in pale afternoon sunlight. Miss Dawson brought nothing but a folder and a warm smile. She started simply. "How are you feeling today, Charlie?" He answered the same way he always had. "I'm okay." But she didn't push. She leaned in slightly and said, "Your teachers are worried. They've seen bruises. You seem scared. Can you tell me how you got those bruises?" Charlie looked down at his hands. They were trembling. I just fell," he mumbled. "At home. I tripped." Miss Dawson made a note but didn't argue. Years of experience told her that frightened children rarely opened up the first time. "If something is wrong," she said softly, "you can tell me. I promise. You won't be in trouble." But Charlie stayed silent. The shadows in his eyes said more than words ever could. After the meeting, Miss Dawson met again with Mr. Evans and Miss Turner. "He's not ready to open up," she told them honestly, "but I have a feeling there's something serious going on. I'll schedule a visit to his foster home. If there's anything unusual, we'll take the next step." And so the quiet chain of concern turned into action, because sometimes it only takes a few caring adults paying attention to save a child from being lost forever. Following Charlie's hesitant conversation with Miss Dawson, the social worker wasted no time. Although the boy had offered only vague answers and denied anything was wrong, her instincts told a different story. Something about the way his shoulders twitched, how he refused to make eye contact, and the trembling in his voice, it all painted a picture Miss Dawson had seen before. Children rarely tell you outright. They hide their pain behind small words, behind polite nods, and downcast eyes, but their silence speaks volumes. According to school records, Charlie had been placed with Mark and Linda Pearson 6 months earlier. There wasn't much available about his previous placements, only that he had lived in 2 other foster homes prior to this one. That alone was a red flag. Frequent moves can sometimes mean the child has trouble adjusting, but just as often, it means the homes weren't safe or suitable. Miss Dawson knew better than to rely solely on paperwork. What she needed was a visit, eyes on the home, ears tuned to tone and body language, a feel for the unspoken truths that walls sometimes try to hide. When she called the Pearsons to schedule a home visit, they were perfectly accommodating, too accommodating. "We'd love to have you over," Linda said sweetly over the phone. "Charlie's doing so well here. We just adore him. He's a bit shy, but he's coming along." Miss Dawson scheduled the visit for the following week. On the outside, everything appeared ideal. The Pearsons' home was located in a tidy suburban neighborhood, with freshly cut grass, flower beds under each window, and a patriotic flag fluttering on the porch. The kind of place people drive past and think, what a nice home. When Miss Dawson arrived, Linda greeted her with a big smile and a tray of cookies. Mark appeared soon after, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a pressed polo shirt and a firm expression. Their house was immaculate. Tasteful decorations adorned the walls, family photos sat in symmetrical frames, and a faint scent of lemon cleaner lingered in the air. It was all very curated. Charlie was there too, sitting quietly on the edge of the couch. He didn't speak unless spoken to. His eyes remained glued to the floor, and his hands stayed folded tightly in his lap. When Miss Dawson asked him a few gentle questions about school, he answered with one-word replies. Whenever she tried to steer the conversation toward his well-being, Linda would jump in with a laugh. "Oh, he's just a quiet one," she'd say, ruffling Charlie's hair. "Takes a while to warm up, but he's a sweetheart. Isn't that right?" Charlie nodded, never lifting his gaze. Mark, arms folded across his chest, would simply offer a solemn, almost rehearsed nod whenever Linda spoke. "We make sure he has everything he needs," he added. "We feed him well, give him structure. That's what these kids need, structure." Miss Dawson smiled politely, but said little. Her eyes, however, were observing everything. The way Charlie stiffened at Linda's touch, the way he flinched slightly when Mark's voice dropped just a bit in tone, the way his answers always aligned with whatever Linda had just said, like a child reading from a silent script. It was subtle, very subtle, but Miss Dawson had spent years training herself to see what others missed. She noticed that Charlie never once looked at either foster parent, that his posture was always slightly hunched, like he was bracing for something. She saw the faint bruises beneath the collar of his shirt when he shifted, barely visible, but unmistakable. Still, without direct disclosure or physical proof, there was little she could act on immediately. That was the cruel reality of child protection. The system demanded evidence, a confession, a slip, something more than instinct. Miss Dawson left that day, with a fake smile and a heavy heart. "Thank you for your time," she told the Pearsons politely. "I'll be in touch if we need anything further." Once she was back in her car, she let the smile fade. She pulled out her notebook and began writing rapidly. Every detail mattered: tone of voice, body language, environment, interaction. "Too perfect," she wrote. "Charlie robotic, avoids eye contact, flinches a touch. Linda overly controlling. Mark silent but intimidating presence." She circled 2 words: possible grooming. Later that afternoon, she returned to Ridgewood Middle School and met again with Mr. Evans and Miss Turner. She shared her impressions, her concern, her frustration. "He won't speak," she said, sighing, "but he's terrified. I saw it in his posture, in his silence. It's as though he's been trained to say exactly what they want." "Can we do anything?" Mr. Evans asked. "We'll keep the case open," Miss Dawson replied, "and I'll start pushing for an unannounced check. I'll also flag this placement in the system. If there's anything else, another injury, a sudden behavior change, anything, we escalate fast." It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was something. And for Charlie, every small step toward the truth might one day lead to safety. Behind closed doors, danger still lurked, but now, the doors weren't as tightly shut. Someone was watching, someone cared, and sometimes, that's the beginning of everything. In the days following Miss Dawson's visit to the Pearson household, the atmosphere at Ridgewood Middle School became quietly charged. Mr. Evans, Miss Turner, and Mr. Reynolds all carried an unspoken agreement. Charlie needed watching over. There was no concrete proof yet, but every instinct told them the boy was in trouble. The challenge, as always, was how to help a child who wouldn't or couldn't ask for help. Evans, now more observant than ever, began to notice the small things Charlie did that once seemed like quirks, but now looked more like signs. The way Charlie tensed whenever someone raised their voice, the way he flinched if someone walked too fast near him, even the way he sat, always hunched, arms folded across his stomach, as if trying to shield himself from the world. One drizzly Monday morning, Charlie came to school soaked through, his thin hoodie barely protecting him from the rain. His sneakers were soggy, and he was visibly shivering by the time he entered Miss Turner's classroom. She approached him with concern, gently offering a sweater from the lost and found box kept by her desk. "It's warm, washed, and just your size," she said, with a kind smile. But Charlie refused with a frantic shake of his head. "I'm not cold," he insisted, voice tight. Miss Turner didn't press him, but her worry deepened. No 12-year-old should be walking around in 35-degree weather in a hoodie soaked through to the bone, refusing warmth. Later that day, while reviewing homework, Mr. Evans caught sight of something that stopped him cold: faint purplish bruises along Charlie's neck, just above the collar of his shirt. He paused, his heart sinking. When the lunch bell rang, Mr. Evans asked Charlie to stay behind for a moment. He approached him carefully, kneeling to his level so he wouldn't appear threatening. "Charlie," he said gently, "can I ask you something?" Charlie looked up, his eyes already wide with panic. "I noticed something on your neck," Mr. Evans continued. "Are you hurt?" Charlie immediately clutched at the collar of his hoodie, pulling it up as if to hide. "It's nothing," he said quickly. "I'm fine." Mr. Evans fought the urge to press harder. He had learned over the years that pushing too soon could make a frightened child shut down. Still, it was getting harder to stand by silently. These were not isolated signs. This was a pattern. Before he could say more, Charlie bolted from the room, brushing past Miss Turner in the hallway. Tears threatened to spill from his eyes as he disappeared into the crowd of students. Miss Turner stepped into the classroom. "What happened?" she asked, eyes narrowing with concern. Mr. Evans exhaled deeply. "He's terrified," he said, "and I'm out of patience with pretending we don't know something's wrong." That afternoon, both teachers called Miss Dawson again. They detailed the morning's events and voiced their growing concern. "I'll make another visit," Miss Dawson said firmly. "I'll escalate it if I need to, but I still need something." His words, a confession, or something that confirms what we all suspect. She returned to the school later that week, pulling Charlie from class for another private meeting. This time, he looked even smaller in the chair, his legs swinging slightly above the floor, hands tucked into the sleeves of his hoodie. "Charlie," she said softly, "I know this is hard, but if something is happening at home, I need you to tell me. You won't be in trouble, you won't be alone." Charlie shook his head slowly. "I can't," he whispered. His eyes glistened, but no more words came. Miss Dawson left the room with her heart heavy once again. Still, things only grew worse. A few days later, Charlie came to school with a noticeable limp. He tried to hide it, wincing each time he stepped, but Miss Turner saw him falter as he made his way to his desk. She motioned to Mr. Evans, who intercepted Charlie in the hallway shortly after. "Hey buddy," he said in a soft voice, "let's take a quick walk, just you and me." Charlie hesitated, then nodded. They walked in silence until they reached a quiet corner near the staff lounge. Mr. Evans crouched down, gently resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I noticed you're walking a little different today. Did something happen?" Charlie bit his lip hard. His eyes darted around, as if scanning for someone listening. "I can't," he whispered again, voice trembling. "You don't have to be afraid," Mr. Evans said. "Whatever's going on, we'll help you." Charlie looked at him, really looked, for the first time in a while. His lower lip quivered. "They'll be mad," he whispered, "if I talk." It was the closest he'd come to an admission. That same afternoon, Charlie stayed behind again to help straighten the classroom, something he had begun doing more and more often. Mr. Evans sensed that it was Charlie's way of buying time, avoiding the return home. As they worked in silence, Mr. Evans decided to try something different. "You know," he began gently, "I wasn't always a teacher. I had some hard times as a kid too." He didn't go into details. He didn't need to. Just the simple act of sharing, of showing that even adults can have painful pasts, seemed to open something in Charlie. The boy's hands stilled. He stared at the chalkboard for a long moment, then murmured, almost inaudibly, "They hurt me." Mr. Evans felt his heart ache. He reached out slowly, placing a hand on Charlie's shoulder. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "You did the right thing. I promise, we'll do everything we can to keep you safe." But Charlie's face crumpled in fear. "Don't tell them I told you," he pleaded. "Please, I have to tell Miss Dawson," Mr. Evans explained gently. "She can protect you. But I promise, we'll figure this out together." Charlie nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. Then in a sudden burst of panic, he turned and fled the room. Mr. Evans sat down at his desk, heart pounding. He knew what he had to do next, because now, the signs were no longer silent. Charlie had spoken, and that changed everything. That Friday afternoon, the halls of Ridgewood Middle School were unusually quiet. Most students had already boarded the buses or slipped into their parents' cars, eager for the weekend ahead. But Charlie remained, as he often did in recent weeks. He lingered in Mr. Evans' classroom, under the pretense of helping organize desks and straighten chairs. The truth, as Mr. Evans suspected, was simpler. Charlie didn't want to go home. Mr. Evans wiped the chalkboard as Charlie quietly picked at a peeling sticker on one of the desks. The boy hadn't said much all day. He looked pale, tired, like he hadn't slept in days. The fresh bruises near his ankle, and the limp he tried so hard to hide, still haunted Mr. Evans's thoughts. He knew they were running out of time. He glanced at the boy, and gently broke the silence. "Charlie," he said, keeping his voice low and warm, "you've been through more than any kid should have to face. I know it's hard to talk, but I want you to know, I'm here." Charlie paused, his small hands frozen over the edge of the desk. He didn't look up. Mr. Evans continued, this time choosing to share something personal. "I wasn't always a teacher," he said. "When I was your age, I had my own struggles. Home wasn't always a safe place for me either." He wasn't telling a fabricated story to earn sympathy, just the truth, softly spoken, offered like a bridge across a chasm of silence. Charlie turned his head slightly, enough to show he was listening. "Sometimes," Mr. Evans said, "the hardest thing is believing there's someone out there who really wants to help." For a long moment, there was only the faint hum of the overhead lights. Then, slowly, Charlie let the sticker fall from his fingers. "They hurt me," he whispered. The words were fragile, barely more than a breath, but they hung in the room like thunder. Mr. Evans felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of sorrow and relief. He approached carefully, kneeling down so he wouldn't tower over the boy. "Thank you for telling me," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "That was very brave, Charlie." Tears welled in the boy's eyes, his face twisted in fear, as he looked up for the first time that day. "Please," he said, voice shaking, "don't tell them I told you. They'll be so mad. They'll hurt me worse." Mr. Evans took a deep breath. He wished he could promise to keep Charlie's secret, but he knew better. As a teacher, and more importantly, as a protector, he had a responsibility. "I have to tell Miss Dawson," he said gently. "She's the one who can keep you safe. You won't be alone in this." Charlie's eyes widened with panic. He pulled away, his small frame trembling. "We'll figure it out together," Mr. Evans added, trying to meet his gaze. "I promise you don't have to go through this alone." But fear was already taking over. Charlie bolted from the classroom, tears slipping down his cheeks, his backpack thudding against his back. As he ran, Mr. Evans sat back slowly, heart pounding. The confession had come, finally, but it hadn't brought peace. Not yet. It had cracked open the door to truth, and now, there was no turning back. That evening, he made the call to Miss Dawson. He told her everything. Within 24 hours, an emergency motion was filed. Child Protective Services moved quickly. Charlie was to be removed from the Pearson household immediately. Everything changed after that. For Charlie, it was a blur. One moment, he was returning from school, and the next, he was being asked to gather his belongings while two CPS agents stood nearby. Mark and Linda Pearson exploded with anger, claiming Charlie was lying, insisting that he was unstable and ungrateful, but their fury only added weight to the suspicions. That night, Charlie lay on a thin mattress at a state-run shelter, surrounded by unfamiliar voices and flickering fluorescent lights. He stared at the ceiling, wide-eyed, trying to process what had just happened, and yet, for the first time in months, he wasn't afraid someone might burst into his room with a raised hand or a cruel word. He wasn't safe yet, but he was no longer alone, and that, for a boy like Charlie, was the first fragile taste of hope. Charlie barely remembered the car ride that took him from the Pearsons' house to the state-run children's shelter. Everything felt like a haze. One moment, he was standing in his room, being told to pack his things. The next, he was sitting in the back seat of a government car, holding a small plastic bag containing 2 t-shirts, a toothbrush, and his battered sketch pad. No goodbyes, no explanations, just the sterile voice of a social worker saying, "It's going to be okay, Charlie." But Charlie had learned not to trust those words. The shelter was not a bad place, not on the surface. The building was painted in bright, cheerful colors, and the staff tried their best to make it feel like a home. There were bunk beds lined up in small rooms, cafeteria-style meals served 3 times a day, and a recreation room with board games and an old television. But to Charlie, it all felt temporary. Another stop in a string of places where he never truly belonged. Most of the other kids were older, louder, some were angry, others withdrawn like him. Some had been there for months, others for only a few days. The noise, the tension, the constant movement, it made Charlie feel smaller than ever. He kept to himself, staying quiet, scribbling drawings in his sketchbook during free time. Even then, he found it hard to focus. The images in his head were louder than the room around him. Mark's booming voice, Linda's sharp grip on his arm, the closet they'd lock him in when he cried. He tried not to remember, but the memories came anyway, especially at night. The thin blanket did little to keep out the cold, and he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, ears tuned to every creak and murmur. When sleep came, it brought nightmares. He'd wake up sweating, heart pounding, convinced he was still in that house, that they would come for him. In those early days, he saw Mr. Evans only once, a short visit during a break in the school schedule. The teacher had brought him a new set of colored pencils and a fresh sketch pad. Charlie had thanked him in a quiet voice, eyes never leaving the floor. "You don't have to say much," Mr. Evans had said kindly, "just know that I'm still here." But Charlie couldn't shake the feeling that this too would end, that Mr. Evans would forget about him, like so many other adults had. One evening, after dinner, Charlie sat in the corner of the recreation room, with his knees pulled to his chest. The television played some cartoon in the background, laughter and arguments rising around him, as the other kids squabbled over games and snacks. One boy tried to talk to him, asked if he wanted to join a card game, but Charlie shook his head. "I'm not feeling well," he murmured, retreating to his bunk. He didn't sleep that night, and sometime around 2 a.m., while the staff were distracted, settling a loud dispute in another room, Charlie slipped out. He didn't have a plan, just a small backpack, his sketch pad, and a deep aching need to disappear. The night air was damp with mist, the sidewalk shone with leftover drizzle, and the chill cut straight through his thin jacket. He walked for hours, not knowing where he was going, just away, away from the shelter, away from memories, away from hope, which hurt more than anything else when it slipped through your fingers. At dawn, he found an old bus stop with a cracked bench and a narrow metal awning. He curled up beneath it, trying to stay dry, but the cold seeped into his bones. He dozed in and out of sleep, twitching awake at every passing car. His stomach ached with hunger, his feet sore from walking in wet shoes. When morning traffic picked up, Charlie roused himself and stumbled toward a nearby convenience store. Maybe someone would help him. Maybe he could just warm up inside for a few minutes. But the glare of the fluorescent lights, the sharp smells of coffee and disinfectant, made him feel even more out of place. He hovered by the door, head down, trying not to be noticed. That's when a familiar car pulled into the lot. Charlie's heart stopped. It was Mr. Evans. The teacher stepped out of his car, clearly on his way to school, holding a set of keys and glancing around. Then his eyes landed on Charlie, soaked, pale, and shaking in the early morning light. Charlie couldn't answer. His throat closed up. Emotion surged like a tidal wave. He dropped his head, hot tears slipping down his cheeks. Mr. Evans rushed over. "What on earth? Are you okay? Where have you been?" Charlie could only sob, burying his face in his arms. Mr. Evans didn't hesitate. He led Charlie to the car, turned on the heater, and found an old jacket in the back seat to drape over the boy's shoulders. He handed him a granola bar and a bottle of water from his work bag. Charlie ate slowly, his hands trembling. "We need to get you back to the shelter," Mr. Evans said gently. "They're probably worried sick." Charlie shook his head. "I don't want to go back there. I know it's not perfect," Mr. Evans replied, voice steady, "but it's safer than being out here. I promise. I won't leave you. We'll figure this out." That afternoon, after contacting Miss Dawson and the shelter staff, Mr. Evans made a decision that would change both their lives. "I want to foster him," he told Miss Dawson, "at least temporarily. I have a spare room. I'm a teacher. I can keep him safe." Miss Dawson blinked, surprised but moved. "You know that's not a small request. There are background checks, home visits." "Then let's start now," Mr. Evans said. "Charlie can't stay in limbo. Not after this." Charlie sat nearby, listening. He had never heard an adult speak like that for him, not about him. His chest tightened, not in fear this time, but in something new. Could it be hope? For the first time in a very long time, Charlie began to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone really meant it when they said, "You're not alone." Charlie's world had changed quickly, again. One day he was in a crowded shelter, and the next he found himself in a warm, quiet home. Mr. Evans, his former teacher, now his temporary foster parent, gave him not just a roof and a bed, but something even rarer: consistency, kindness, and safety. The house wasn't grand. It was modest, lived in, and filled with the smell of coffee, chalk dust, and the occasional burned toast. But it was steady. There were books lining the hallway, old framed photos from past school events, and now on the fridge, a sketch Charlie had made, a small boy holding an umbrella, in the rain, looking up toward a light in the sky. Even in this fragile piece, Charlie knew the storm wasn't over. The legal process had only just begun. Mark and Linda Pearson, his former foster parents, were being investigated for child abuse, but they weren't backing down. "They're saying he's lying," Miss Dawson explained one afternoon, sitting with Mr. Evans at the kitchen table. "They've hired a lawyer. They're painting Charlie as a troubled kid who makes up stories to get attention." Charlie sat nearby, drawing quietly. He didn't look up, but Mr. Evans could see the tension in his shoulders. "It's not unusual," Miss Dawson continued. "Many abusers deny everything. They'll try to shift the blame, say the child is unstable, but we have teacher testimony, medical records, photos of the bruises." "But is that enough?" Mr. Evans asked quietly. Miss Dawson hesitated. "We need Charlie's voice, his testimony. Without it, the judge may not feel there's enough for a conviction. The Pearsons are well-dressed, well-spoken. People like that are hard to convict without something solid." Charlie remained silent, but his pencil paused in mid-sketch. Later that night, Mr. Evans found him sitting at the kitchen table before sunrise, staring into a cold cup of tea. "You couldn't sleep?" Mr. Evans asked. Charlie shook his head. "They might win, right?" he whispered. "Then I'd have to go back." Mr. Evans sat beside him. "We'll do everything we can to stop that, but you need to speak up in court, Charlie. I know it's scary, but your words matter, more than anything." Charlie looked down at his hands. "What if they find out what I say? What if they hurt me again?" "They won't get near you," Mr. Evans said, voice firm. "I promise." The weeks that followed were filled with tense preparations. Miss Dawson worked with the district attorney's office. Mr. Evans wrote a detailed statement. Miss Turner, too, agreed to testify. Even Mr. Reynolds, the janitor, offered to share what he had seen. That night, Charlie begged to stay at school rather than go home, but the Pearsons' legal team was clever. They submitted glowing letters from neighbors, Sunday school teachers, even a former foster child who claimed the Pearsons had always been kind. Their attorney argued that the bruises could have come from falls, schoolyard accidents, or even Charlie's own clumsiness. The courtroom sessions began, each one more draining than the last. Miss Turner testified first, speaking calmly about the bruises she noticed, the way Charlie flinched from sudden movements, the time he nearly collapsed when a locker slammed nearby. "I've worked with children for over 15 years, she said. "Fear like that, it doesn't come from nowhere." Mr. Reynolds described the night Charlie approached him in the hallway. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, the janitor recalled. "Begging to stay overnight, in a school building. That's not normal. That's a child trying to escape something." Mr. Evans' voice shook slightly as he told the court about the afternoon Charlie confessed. He said, "They hurt me." Mr. Evans said, "I've never seen such fear in a child's eyes." Then it was the Pearsons' turn. Linda took the stand in a neat blue dress, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "Charlie's a sweet boy, but he has issues," she said tearfully. "He makes things up sometimes. We tried to help him. We gave him everything." Mark spoke next, his face stoic. "I believe in firm discipline, Your Honor," he said, "but I never laid a hand on that child in anger. I'd never hurt him." The courtroom grew tense. Charlie, seated with his child advocate, kept his eyes on the floor. Miss Dawson leaned in. "Are you ready?" she asked gently. Charlie's voice was barely a whisper. "I think so." The judge called for a recess before his testimony. Outside the courtroom, Charlie sat on a bench beside Mr. Evans. "You don't have to be perfect," Mr. Evans said, "just be honest." Charlie nodded. That afternoon, he stepped up to the witness stand, hands shaking. He wore a shirt that was too big, and sleeves that covered his palms, but his voice, though soft, was steady. "They hit me," he said. "They grabbed me. They locked me in closets. They told me not to tell anyone." The courtroom was silent. "They said no one would believe me," Charlie continued. "But Mr. Evans did." Tears filled his eyes, and he turned to look at his teacher. Mr. Evans gave a small nod, eyes misty. It was not just a testimony, it was a moment of truth. One child, standing alone, telling the world what had been done to him, behind closed doors. The battle wasn't over, but Charlie had finally spoken. And now, the system had no excuse not to listen. The day Charlie was called to the witness stand, the courthouse felt colder than usual. The judge, a woman with kind but firm eyes, had cleared the room of unnecessary spectators to preserve the boy's comfort. Even so, the courtroom still felt intimidating. Its tall ceilings, polished benches, and rows of unfamiliar adults were enough to make any 12-year-old shrink into silence. But Charlie didn't shrink. He took the stand wearing a clean borrowed shirt that was a size too big, its sleeves nearly swallowing his small hands. Seated beside him was a child advocate, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and gentle eyes, ready to guide him through the process. She leaned over and whispered, "Just take your time. You're not alone." From the opposing side of the room, Mark and Linda Pearson watched. Linda dabbed her eyes with a tissue, maintaining the look of a sorrowful mother. Mark sat rigid, arms crossed, his jaw tight. To Charlie, their presence alone was enough to make his palms sweat. The courtroom quieted as the defense attorney stood, a man in a dark suit, his voice smooth and practiced. "Charlie," he began, "you've been in several foster homes, isn't that right?" Charlie nodded. "Yes, and sometimes, when you don't like the rules, you leave, or run away. Is that fair to say?" Charlie shifted in his seat, his hands gripping the armrests. "I run when I'm scared," he said softly. "But isn't it true that you've made claims before? Claims that weren't proven?" "I told the truth," Charlie said. His voice was barely above a whisper, but firm. The lawyer walked slowly in front of the bench. "Yet you never told the police, never called a hotline, never screamed for help. Doesn't that seem strange, Charlie?" Charlie blinked back tears. "No one would have believed me." A silence stretched out. The defense attorney raised an eyebrow. "So you're saying everyone else is lying? Mr. and Mrs. Pearson, who opened their home to you, are lying, and you're the only one telling the truth?" Charlie hesitated. Then he turned slightly in his seat and looked toward Mr. Evans. "I'm not the only one who saw," he said quietly. "They saw too, my teachers. They knew something was wrong. They tried to help, The attorney frowned, but before he could press further, Miss Dawson stood. "Objection, Your Honor," badgering the witness. "Sustained," the judge said firmly. "Counselor, please keep your questions within bounds." The defense attorney stepped back. Then came Miss Dawson's turn. She walked gently to the stand, smiled at Charlie, and spoke softly. "Charlie, can you tell the court what happened while you were living with Mark and Linda Pearson, just in your own words?" Charlie swallowed hard. His heart pounded in his ears. For a moment, he considered shutting down again. He had every reason to stay silent. But then he remembered that night, in Mr. Evans's classroom, the kindness in his voice, the promise, "You're not alone." And so Charlie spoke. "They hit me," he said, "sometimes with their hands, sometimes with a belt. Linda used to grab my arm so hard it bruised, and if I cried, they'd say I was being dramatic. They'd say I was lying, or they'd lock me in the closet, until I stopped." The courtroom was completely still. "I didn't tell anyone at first, because I was scared. I thought no one would believe me. And sometimes I thought, maybe it was my fault." He glanced toward Linda, whose face had turned pale. Mark avoided eye contact. "But it wasn't my fault," Charlie said, voice trembling. "No kid deserves to be treated like that." Tears slid down his cheeks, but he didn't look away. "I used to draw in my sketchbook, just to stay calm. I used to hide at school, so I wouldn't have to go home. I even asked the janitor once if I could sleep there. That's how scared I was." Miss Dawson nodded slowly, tears gathering in her own eyes. "Thank you, Charlie," she said. "That took great courage." Charlie looked down, exhausted, but lighter. It was as if saying the truth had removed a weight from his chest. The defense attorney asked a few more questions, but the damage was done. The quiet power of Charlie's testimony had shifted the courtroom. Everyone, judge, jury, social workers, even the bailiff, could see it in the boy's eyes. He wasn't fabricating this, he was surviving it. After he finished, the judge called for a short recess. Mr. Evans met Charlie just outside the courtroom doors. The moment Charlie saw him, he broke down, wrapping his arms tightly around his teacher's waist. Mr. Evans knelt to return the hug, whispering, "I'm proud of you. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Miss Turner stood nearby, dabbing her own eyes with a tissue. "You did great, sweetheart," she said softly. "You told the truth. That's all anyone can ask." Back inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed. The Pearsons' defense crumbled under the weight of Charlie's words. The medical records, the teacher testimonies, the bruises, all of it now had a voice to go with them. By the end of the hearing, the judge ruled in favor of Child Protective Services. Charlie would remain under Mr. Evans's care. The Pearsons were found guilty of abuse. A sentencing hearing would follow, but in that moment, none of it mattered as much as this. Charlie had told the truth, and the truth had finally been heard. The courtroom was hushed. As the judge returned to the bench, the air seemed heavier than it had been all morning, as if everyone present was holding their breath. Charlie sat beside his child advocate, his small hands folded tightly in his lap. Across the aisle, Mark and Linda Pearson sat stiffly, their expressions unreadable. Their attorney whispered something to them, but neither responded. The judge looked over the room and spoke clearly, her voice measured and calm. "This court finds sufficient evidence to support the claims brought forth by Child Protective Services and the testimony of the minor child, Charlie. Based on corroborating witness accounts, medical documentation, and the direct statements of the child, I find Mark and Linda Pearson guilty of child abuse." The words landed like a quiet thunderclap. Charlie's eyes widened, and for a moment, he didn't move. He had waited so long to feel safe, to be believed. Now at last, someone with the power to act had heard him and acted. The judge continued, noting that sentencing would be scheduled for a later date, and that until then, both Mark and Linda would remain under strict supervision with bail conditions. Mark's jaw clenched. As the judge finished, Linda began to sob, softly at first, then louder, her tissue clutched tightly in one hand. But this time, there were no sympathetic glances. No one in the room doubted the verdict. The silence said as much. Charlie turned toward Mr. Evans, who gave him a steady, reassuring nod. "You did it," he whispered. "You told the truth, and it mattered. Miss Turner, seated just a few rows behind them, had tears in her eyes. Even Miss Dawson, the seasoned social worker who had seen more than her share of courtroom battles, looked deeply moved. She leaned over to Charlie and said, "I'm proud of you, kiddo. Really proud." But the victory, though meaningful, wasn't without its shadows. In the days following the verdict, Charlie struggled to process it all. He didn't quite understand what a sentencing hearing meant, or how long it would take. He just knew that the people who had hurt him were not yet behind bars, and that meant they were still out there. "They won't come back, will they?" he asked Mr. Evans one night, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," Mr. Evans said gently, setting down the dish towel he'd been using in the kitchen. "They're not allowed anywhere near you. There's a court order in place. You're protected." Charlie nodded, but the fear lingered in his eyes. Even with the verdict in hand, trauma doesn't vanish overnight. Still, life began to take shape again. Charlie returned to school. He was quiet, but not withdrawn. He started sitting with Olivia at lunch again, and sometimes he even smiled, especially when she made a joke about Mr. Evans' outdated cell phone, or told stories about her clumsy cat. One day, Miss Turner pulled Charlie aside. After class, "I wanted you to know," she said softly, "that what you did in court, it made a difference, not just for you, but for other kids too. Your bravery will help people take signs like yours more seriously." Charlie looked down, unsure what to say. Praise still felt strange to him. "Thank you," he mumbled. She smiled. "Anytime." Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Mr. Evans worked with Miss Dawson to begin the formal foster care process. The paperwork was extensive. There were background checks, home evaluations, and long forms that asked questions about Charlie's emotional needs, sleeping habits, and preferred activities. "I didn't know drawing counted as an activity," Charlie said one evening, peeking over Mr. Evans's shoulder as he filled out a form at the dining room table. "It does now," Mr. Evans said with a smile, adding, "and I wrote that you're pretty good at it." Charlie's cheeks flushed. "They're not that good. They're better than anything I could do," Mr. Evans replied, ruffling his hair. Though still temporary, the arrangement began to feel more permanent. Mr. Evans set up a small desk in Charlie's room and stocked it with pencils, sketch pads, and books. He hung one of Charlie's drawings in the hallway and placed another in a simple frame in the living room. But despite the warmth of the home and the kindness that surrounded him, Charlie still had nightmares. Some nights, he woke up gasping, convinced he was back in the Pearsons' house. Each time, Mr. Evans came in, sat beside him, and waited quietly until the shaking stopped. "They're not here," he'd say. "They can't get to you now." One particular night, after such an episode, Charlie sat at the kitchen table with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. The world outside was quiet. Mr. Evans poured him a glass of warm milk. "Do you ever think they'll forget about me?" Charlie asked. Mr. Evans sat down across from him. "I think people who hurt others the way they did, they're too focused on themselves to think about anyone else. But the law won't forget, and neither will the people who care about you. We'll make sure you're safe." Charlie took a sip of milk, then nodded. In the weeks that followed, the sentencing hearing approached. Prosecutors were confident. The charges, child abuse, emotional neglect, and violation of foster care responsibilities, were serious, and the evidence was strong. Mark and Linda Pearson had fallen from their pedestal, and though they still denied everything, the system had finally seen through the mask. They weren't caregivers. They were predators hiding behind smiles and curated living rooms. And thanks to Charlie's courage, they were no longer free to harm again. The justice system had spoken, and this time, it had listened to the voice of a child. The weeks following the Pearsons' guilty verdict were quieter, but not without worry. Charlie still woke from nightmares, sometimes breathless and shaking, as if Mark or Linda might suddenly appear in his room. Even after justice had been served in court, fear still lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. Mr. Evans, now both teacher and foster parent, did all he could to reassure the boy. He installed new locks on the doors, added a small alarm system, and reminded Charlie every night before bed, "You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you again." But trauma doesn't leave on command, and healing was a slow process. Some mornings, Charlie would sit silently at the breakfast table, staring into a bowl of cereal gone soggy. On other days, he seemed almost like any other kid, laughing gently at Olivia's silly jokes at school, or quietly showing Mr. Evans a new drawing he was proud of. The house, once quiet and orderly, now held traces of childhood again. A pair of untied sneakers in the hallway, colored pencils scattered across the coffee table, and the occasional smudge of peanut butter on the counter. And then came the day when Mr. Evans asked the question that had been growing in his heart since the night he found Charlie at the convenience store. "Charlie, how would you feel if I adopted you?" The boy froze. He was sitting on the floor sketching, while Mr. Evans graded papers nearby. The pencil slipped slightly from his hand. "You mean, like really?" Charlie asked. "Not just staying here until someone else takes me." "Really," Mr. Evans said, setting his pen down. "Only if you want that too." Charlie's voice was barely a whisper. "What if you change your mind?" "I won't," Mr. Evans said firmly. "I've thought about this a lot. You deserve a home that's yours, not temporary, not for now, something that's forever." Tears brimmed in Charlie's eyes. "Okay," he said, his voice shaking. "Yeah, I want that." The adoption process wasn't quick. There were evaluations, more home visits, and hours of paperwork. Social workers came by to ask questions, inspect the house again, and ensure that the bond between Charlie and Mr. Evans was genuine and stable. Miss Dawson served as a strong advocate for both of them, explaining in her reports how Mr. Evans had gone above and beyond, not just as a caregiver, but as a source of healing. Even Miss Turner provided a statement, detailing how she had watched Charlie grow more confident and less withdrawn since living with Mr. Evans. "He's starting to participate in class," she wrote. "He laughs sometimes now. He raises his hand. That's not just progress, it's transformation." Charlie attended weekly therapy sessions to work through his fears. His counselor helped him understand that his past did not define his future, that the guilt and shame he sometimes carried weren't his to bear. Some sessions ended in tears, others in silence, but little by little, he began to let go of the fear that happiness was just another trap waiting to vanish. Then one bright spring morning, the day arrived, the final adoption hearing. Charlie wore a clean shirt and jeans. He fidgeted nervously outside the courthouse, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Mr. Evans crouched beside him, adjusting the collar on his shirt. "You really want me?" Charlie asked, still unsure. Mr. Evans looked him in the eye and smiled. "Yes, Charlie, with all my heart." Inside the courtroom, the judge greeted them warmly. Unlike the earlier abuse hearings, this session was shorter, lighter in tone. She reviewed the file, flipped through the reports, and then looked up at the two of them, this unlikely pair, who had found family in the ruins of something terrible. "I hereby grant the petition for adoption," she declared. "Congratulations." Charlie sat still for a moment, as if the words hadn't yet sunk in. Then he looked at Mr. Evans, and for the first time, truly believed it. He had a father. Miss Dawson smiled from the gallery, blinking back tears. Miss Turner clapped softly from the back of the room. Olivia, who hadn't been allowed in the courtroom, but had waited anxiously outside, jumped up and down when she saw them exit. Later that evening, back at home, Mr. Evans prepared a small celebration dinner. Charlie's favorite, spaghetti, garlic bread, and chocolate chip cookies for dessert. They ate at the kitchen table, surrounded by laughter and warmth, and afterward, they sat on the couch to watch a movie. Halfway through the film, Charlie leaned his head against Mr. Evans's shoulder. "I don't know what I'm supposed to call you now," he said. Mr. Evans chuckled. "Well, I suppose you could still call me Mr. Evans if you want, but Dad works too." Charlie didn't respond right away, but a few minutes later, his voice drifted up, quiet and careful. "Dad, yes son, I'm happy." Mr. Evans smiled, wrapping an arm around him. "Me too, Charlie, me too." And in that simple moment, free from fear, full of hope, they began a new chapter, not as teacher and student, not as foster parent and child, but as family. In the weeks after the adoption, life for Charlie finally began to settle into something he had never known before: normalcy, not perfection, not fairy tale endings, but quiet routines filled with warmth, safety, and the comfort of being wanted. Mr. Evans' modest home slowly transformed into a space that reflected both of them. Charlie's artwork now hung on the walls, bright splashes of color and imagination where there had once been blank space. A small desk had been added to Charlie's room, where he did homework or spent time sketching after school. His backpack no longer sat by the door like a travel bag, always ready for the next move. It now belonged. Each morning, they ate breakfast together: toast, cereal, or scrambled eggs, depending on the day. Mr. Evans would walk Charlie to school when the weather allowed, or drive him on rainy mornings. The same teacher who had once watched Charlie from the front of the classroom now sat across the dinner table, offering math help and gentle conversation. Charlie still had tough days. He would sometimes fall silent when a loud noise startled him, or wake up from dreams that took him back to dark places. But those moments no longer defined him. With the help of regular therapy, his confidence grew. His therapist helped him understand that the pain of the past wasn't his fault, and that healing could happen, even if it was slow. At school, Miss Turner continued to offer her quiet support, always smiling when she passed him in the hallway. Olivia remained his steadfast friend, walking beside him to class, sharing lunch, and laughing at the small things. Together, they helped Charlie rediscover the joy of being a kid. And Mr. Evans, now simply Dad at home, was the steady anchor Charlie had always needed. Whether it was helping with a science project, showing up at a parent-teacher night, or just being there to listen, he never let the boy face life alone again. The Pearsons were eventually sentenced to long prison terms for abuse and kidnapping. When the news came, Charlie didn't cheer. Instead, he sat quietly on the couch beside his adoptive father, processing it all. "They can't hurt me anymore," he said softly. "No," Mr. Evans replied, "they can't." And with that, Charlie turned the page on a chapter of his life written in pain, and began one filled with possibility. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. And for the first time, he truly believed that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. Charlie's journey is more than just a story about hardship and survival. It's a powerful reminder of how deeply a child's life can be impacted by the quiet presence of caring adults. For those of us in our later years who have raised children, taught students, or simply observed generations grow, his experience calls us back to the values we've long held dear: kindness, attentiveness, and the courage to act when something feels wrong. One of the most profound lessons from Charlie's story is that being seen can save a life. So often, we assume children will speak up when something is wrong, but many don't. They stay silent out of fear, confusion, or the belief that no one will believe them. It was the small things: Charlie's hesitation, his bruises, the way he flinched at loud sounds, that told his truth long before his words did. Mr. Evans, Miss Turner, and Mr. Reynolds didn't ignore those signs. They didn't look the other way. They paid attention, and because they did, Charlie's life changed forever. For older adults, this story is also a call to remember the lasting impact we can have, even when we're no longer in positions of authority or full-time caregivers. A kind word, a watchful eye, a moment of patience. These are not small things. They are acts of grace, and sometimes they are the difference between despair and hope. Whether it's a neighbor's grandchild, a young person at church, or a quiet child in the community, our willingness to notice and care matters. Charlie's story also teaches us that healing takes time, and that love, real, patient, unconditional love, can reach places that punishment or procedure never could. Mr. Evans didn't heal Charlie with grand gestures. He healed him by showing up every day, by being consistent, by listening without judgment, and by offering something Charlie had never truly had: a home where he was wanted, not just taken in. In a world that often moves too fast and overlooks the quiet ones, Charlie reminds us to slow down and listen, not just with our ears, but with our hearts. He reminds us that no one is ever too small to matter, and no one is ever too broken to be loved. And perhaps the greatest takeaway for us, as elders in our communities, is this: We are never too old to make a difference. Our experience, our compassion, and our time can still shape the future, one child, one conversation, one act of kindness at a time.